Hi, I'm Dennis Worwood. I'm the USU Extension Agent in Emery County. Today we're talking a little bit about Russian olive control using the cut stump method. Russian olives are native to Eurasia and they become a serious pest in the western United States. They're very competitive, they're drought tolerant, they're somewhat salt tolerant. As a legume they can fix atmospheric nitrogen and outcompete some of the native plants. One big concern we have in this part of the state is that we now have a biological control for tamarisk, which is another invasive woody species. And with the tamarisk being suppressed by their biological control, which is a beetle, the concern is that we're going to have an explosion of Russian olive to take their place. And so we've been doing research on different methods to control them. The cut stump method that we're going to talk about today has some real advantages. In about 5 years of research, one thing we've learned is that it doesn't matter which month of the year we use this method, it's equally effective. And so that's a good thing for someone who has some time in the off season, not during the growing season when they're trying to put up crops, they could do some Russian olive control. Another nice thing about the cut stump method is that it uses a very small amount of herbicide, and the herbicide is applied directly to the stump. Very specific, very little danger of damaging non-target plants. And so it has some real advantages. Biggest disadvantage is it's fairly labor intensive, and with a Russian olive, the most difficult part of control is getting close enough to the plant to control it. They're thorny and they're shrubby and they're messy to work with. With the cut stump method, basically you come in and you cut the tree off and then you apply an herbicide. Now it's a mistake to simply cut the tree and not apply the herbicide, because in our trials basically every tree that we have cut and left untreated has resprouted, and in some cases it appears it actually invigorates the plants. After a couple of years, some of our untreated cut stumps, the trees are taller than adjacent uncut trees and already have fruit on them. So as one farmer told me, if I cut the Russian olive, all I do is make it mad. That's true unless you apply herbicide afterward.
I'm Ron Patterson with Utah State University Extension in Carbon County. We're talking about killing Russian olive trees, and so I'd like to discuss a little bit about the chemical we use and our application method. Some of the chemicals that are labeled for cut stump type treatment would be just as effective. We've found with Russian olive that glyphosate products, Roundup or Kills All, High Yields, Kills All, there's a number of products that have the glyphosate in them, and that's what we've used, and it's been very, very effective. The aquatic label has been just as good as the non-aquatic label, so we have been very successful year-round using glyphosate products to kill Russian olives. I'm sure that the Garlon and some of those others, we're doing some other trials on those. We're testing those to see if they're just as effective, but we've had year-round kill using 41% undiluted glyphosate to treat the stumps. Now our application method is a little bit unique. We use a livestock dosage syringe, just set it to 1 milliliter per click, and that way I can tell exactly how much I'm putting on. It doesn't take very long to do it that way. Some people like to do the little spray bottle thing, but the accuracy isn't probably there. You're not sure how much you're putting on. So we put down our chemical with a livestock syringe. So if we've got a 4-inch tree stump, I'll put 4 milliliters of chemical around the cambium rings, the outside sap rings of the tree. There's no point in treating in the middle. So we'll come in close and take a look and show how the application method works with using the livestock syringe. All right, so we see here we've got this tree that we just cut down. The growth, the food coming from the leaves down to the roots come down through this layer, and the water coming from the roots up to the leaves comes through the xylem tissue. So you got the phloem and the xylem tissue. The active phloem and xylem tissue is just around the outside of the tree. These inside rings here, they're basically deadwood. So they're not going to translocate any of the chemical down to the roots where we need to kill. We've got to kill the roots in order to kill the tree. So we just take the syringe And probably best to, if you got a little bit of a high spot, you start up here and it'll flow down a little bit. You just treat it down. And if you have several stems, you need to treat each stem. And I just, for the purposes of making sure I get a good kill, so that's about 2 milliliters there, and we got about a 3.5 inch, 4 inch stump here, so I'll put a little bit on that. That soaks in really quick. We'll go to each one of these multiple stems and treat each one so that they all get a good treatment. If you don't treat every stem, you're very likely going to have, and we've got all these little ones, so I'll just dab a little bit on each one of those. Otherwise, we would have very likely have some suckers come up that we don't want. We only want to have to do it once. Now these that are kind of got left, we can do kind of a basal bark treatment, but you need to get that onto those just like you do all the others. So that's really the application method. It's really quite simple and it goes fairly fast. You just have to kind of keep up with the sawyers and the swampers and everything. So you got 2 or 3 man crew, they can do the sawing and the swamping. Otherwise, you can high stump them and then come back a day later, cut them and treat them. We've been doing some research on that, and it seems to be just as effective as if you were to cut it and treat it quickly. So when we talk about high stumping, we're basically just going to cut up higher, and that will allow us then to come back and make another cut down low. So we've got to get through all this brush to get to the trunk. Then we can make another quick cut down low and get everything cut off, and then we can treat down low. The other option, we're still doing some trials to research whether or not how effective it is to treat the high stump and kill it this way. If you do that, again, you'd have to treat each one of those stumps, so there's a lot more that you have to do. But this is an option that may work in a fence line where you can't get down because you got the wire in the way. You may be able to cut off at the top of the tree. The jury's still out on how effective that is at this point, but now we can come through and cut that down low and treat the stump. So this is what's called high stumping. One of the reasons we've gone to mostly using glyphosate is we've tried some other products, and the soil activity is a critical factor. With this cut stump treatment, it seems though if the chemical has some soil activity, such as imazapyr or, well, the habitat or arsenal, which is a imazapyr, or some other chemical, then we may have some unexpected or unintended consequences. There's a spot right here behind me. We treated this stump with habitat. We like the aquatic label on it and everything, but this is actually kind of a leach zone from a canal down, and so we've got the leaching, and you can see down where the habitat has killed the vegetation down below the treatment from the motion of the water through the soil. So glyphosate loses all activity when it comes in contact with the soil, so that's why we've kind of stuck with glyphosate. We're trying other products as well, but we're really pleased with glyphosate in that it does not have the soil activity and kill unintended targets. Here's another good example of what happens when you've got some soil activity. You can see that streak of dead zone right down below the stump. You also notice that we've cut these fairly high. You could grab this with a piece of equipment and yank it out. These were treated in 2010, so it's been 3 years since these were treated. They're dead, so you could come back with some equipment now, yank it out, and you would not get any sucker growth off from it. So you can cut them up that high and get good kill, about 12 to 14 inches. You don't have to cut them off right down to the ground.
This is an example of a Russian olive tree that was cut and not treated with an herbicide. And the growth here represents probably 1 or 2 seasons growth of suckers and sprouts from the base of the tree. Now this particular tree, once it had resprouted, we came in and treated with a different treatment method, which was basal bark herbicide application, where you take an herbicide like Garlon 4 Ultra and a crop oil and mix that and spray just the bottom 12 to 18 inches of the tree. And you can see that it's very effective on small trees with thin bark. But you can expect this kind of regrowth if you simply cut a Russian olive and don't treat it with something.
So here's an example. This stump right here was treated in January of 2010, so it's been 3.5 years. It's totally dead, as opposed to partially dead. No, it's totally dead. And here we have one behind us. This was a control. It was cut down the same day, but no chemical, no herbicide treatment. So that's just kind of show you the difference of what happens between treatment and no treatment.
In summary, the cut stump method is an extremely effective way to control Russian olives. One of the very nice things about it is it doesn't matter what time of the year you do it. It's equally effective during the growing season or during the dormant season. Some of the keys, I think, are getting a nice clean final cut so that you have a relatively level surface on all of the cut stems that you're working with. Applying the herbicide within a few minutes after you've cut, and making sure that you get complete coverage of the cambium area just under the bark around the surface of each stem. And if you do that, our experience has been that you can expect nearly 100% control. If you try to do take shortcuts, cut the trees and not treat them, or cut the trees and not treat within a reasonable amount of time, you may not have the results you want. But if you've got some Russian olives that you'd like to get rid of, give the cut stump method a consideration, because it's been very effective in our test plots.